So on this video today, we're going to be talking about inflation. So this is what happens typically with many economies across the world that have what's known as fiat currencies, which is basically virtually all countries that have paper money and coins. And essentially what it means is that over time, the value of the money reduces, or in other words, the price of things actually goes up. So we're going to be talking today about inflation and how that affects property in particular, what it means and how you can essentially benefit property investing from inflation. My name is Mark Ashworth.
I'm Neil Harding. Very briefly, just to talk a little bit about inflation, not to get too technical, but as a concept, and basically inflation is generally regarded as a good thing for an economy. At least a little bit of inflation is regarded as a good thing for an economy. And I think the reasons for that are because governments don't really want to be in a situation where investors, businesses are thinking that, well, actually, this is going to be cheaper tomorrow, so I'll just wait until tomorrow. Because once you get into that situation, you don't want to invest, you don't want to spend, the economy wheels don't move, nothing happens, you get into stagnation or you get into a contraction of the economy, which is just bad news. So to promote business, to promote the economy, you do actually want a little bit of inflation, and the Bank of England's target for long term is 2% growth. You've got a great book, which I know is one of your favourite books of all time.
Yeah, I mean, this is fantastic. So for those people that find things like this a little bit difficult to understand,
like us.
Yeah, the best book that you can read is this one here by Rob Dix. Now, the reason why I like it is because it is really easy to read and easy to understand. It's called The Price of Money, and in this book there's a section all about inflation, and it basically describes how inflation affects the value of money. And this has been going on since 1970.
Is it 6 or 7, something like that?
Where basically the gold standard was removed from how they valued the US dollar. And ever since then, inflation has been really important, and the reason why the value of money goes down over time. So usually whenever I talk to people about inflation, and most people talk about prices going up, and since reading this book, I now say to people, prices haven't gone up, the value of the pound's gone down, which is effectively really what's happened. It costs more of those pounds to buy what you were buying the year before or the year before that. So therefore, the value's decreased in that value of the pound. And if you can understand and think of it like that, then that will help you to understand what inflation really is. And there's a really good section in here that describes if it was still pegged to gold, or if you bought property or any other thing with gold, the amount of gold that it would take to buy that same item today wouldn't change to what it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. But if you were to buy it with money, with pounds in the UK, or dollars if you're in the US, then you would realise that it costs you a lot more of those dollars to buy the same things that you were buying 20 years ago, meaning that the value of gold actually is an investment, and why people buy it and invest in it, and it goes up and down in value, but it has a constant kind of, let's say, value to the amount of gold that you have. It's just that because we convert it to the value of it in pounds, the amount of pounds that it costs you to buy it actually is more pounds than, am I making sense?
No, you are, yeah.
So quite difficult to...
I mean, people may have heard the phrase quantitative easing, right, which is a techie term, but essentially quantitative easing is a fancy way of saying the government has printed more money.
Yeah.
And if you think of money as just a commodity, if there's more of it and it's more readily available, well, then it's probably worth less per unit. If it was any other commodity and it was just more of it readily available, it wouldn't be worth as much for every individual unit. That just sort of makes sense, doesn't it?
You can liken it with a piece of artwork. So let's take Monet, the artist. If you took one of his famous works of art and there was one original piece, how much would that one original piece be? If he painted, or there were hundreds or thousands of them, would it be worth as much? It's exactly the same thing as a pound or £5 note. Right. It's the same difference.
So let's have a look at house prices. So having explained inflation as best as we can, let's look at house prices in the UK. At the nationwide UK house price index, which is where I've got some facts and figures from, because it's absolutely
Well, we're going to post
incredible.
some of these links below so that you can have a look yourself.
Yeah, so have a look at that. And so this goes back to 1952. The average cost of a house at the start of 1952 in the UK was
Drum roll.
£1,891.
Wow.
I mean, buy one with your credit card, right? I mean, it's just crazy. The house prices continue to rise. I'm just going to rattle off some statistics and numbers now, but I think it's really interesting just to see and hear these. Average home costing £2,189 by 1960. In the 70s, 4,378. By the end of that decade, average house prices had quadrupled to a whopping 21,966. In 1989, 59,534, starting to sort of represent more sort of like the numbers that we might imagine. In 1999, 74,638. The average cost of a home reached 152,000 by the end of 2004, and the average cost of a property was 162,000 at the start of 2010. Well, it's now 2023, and I think the number's 287,000. I think, if I remember rightly,
like
from when I last saw. So even from 2010 to 2023, big increase.
And sometimes when you talk to people we mentioned in a previous video that we'd done about house prices doubling every 10 years. I mean, they don't necessarily double every 10 years, but on average, they do, right? If you take those figures, long-term averages of each 10 years, so it might not necessarily be 2010 to 2020, from 2020 to 2030 every 10 years, but on average, some periods of time they go up more, and some periods of time they go up less. But over that time, it is quite incredible to think that they double every 10 years. And when you're in the moment thinking about it, something in your brain tells you that it's not possible for them to double again every 10 years. Like, it's something in your brain tells you that it's not possible. But what you have to remember is that this period now that we've been going through since probably a year ago, let's say last October, since that point where inflation started to get slightly out of control, that is what is making those asset prices increase over time. Inflationary pressures affect obviously day-to-day cost of living, but they also affect house prices in particular.
We've done a separate video on debt and the power of leverage to use other people's money. So if you're buying property using mortgages and buy-to-let mortgages, then it's really important to understand the power of inflation has the, if you like, the equal and opposite effect on the value of your debt and your mortgage balance. So if you've got an interest-only mortgage, which a lot of investors do, and that's what I have, then over time, as you keep paying the interest off every month, your loan balance is staying the same. So let's just say you bought a house and you've got a loan of £100,000 against it. Well, in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, 20, 30 years' time, the number £100,000 is not going to seem like an awful lot of money. Obviously, £100,000 is a lot of money today, but
not as much as it is. Yeah, it's going to be worth less.
And in 70 years' time, it's going to sound as crazily low and insignificant as what was it in 1952? £1,891 for a value. And that's what it's going to sound like. It's going to sound like, wow, 1,008. We're in 70 years' time, I've no doubt at all, people will be thinking, God, can you believe that they were buying houses for £287,000 or they had a mortgage of only £100,000?
The other thing to bear in mind also is about your savings. So let's say, under the same guise, we're talking about inflation. So you've got £100,000 in a savings account and it's bringing you in 5%. Okay, the interest is 5%. Now at the moment, that sounds great because we've been used to 0%, or we've been used to almost next to nothing % in the bank for your savings. But if inflation is running at 6%, then in a year's time, even though you might have 105,000 in the bank because you've earned 5%, that might sound wonderful, but really in real terms, it's now actually worth £1,000 worth less. So you've really got to consider whether you want inflation to work with you or against you. And certainly by buying assets and putting that money in the bank into a property, you've probably got more chance of using inflation for you rather than against you. There's nothing wrong with savings accounts. There's nothing wrong with having some liquid money, some, let's say protection money or whatever you want to call it. It might be wise to put it into something like an ISA or a pension to perhaps save some other areas of tax and whatnot. But what a lot of people don't really consider enough is how inflation will affect their wealth, their money, their savings, or indeed how it can positively affect it if you use leverage in the right way.
Yeah.
And as Neil said earlier, or say on a previous video we've done on leverage, it's important to make sure you don't over leverage, but it's also important to remember the power of what it can do for your investing.
Great, I think that covers it. So thanks ever so much for watching. Please do comment, like and subscribe, and we hope you found that insightful.